A threat was made by a former president of Russia. Well, you just have to read what he said. He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared. Well, I understand India no longer is going to be buying oil from Russia. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's a good step. We'll see what happens, okay?
US President Donald Trump is moving nuclear submarines closer to Russia following Dmitry Medvedev's threats to use nuclear weapons against the United States. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has rejected the last-minute ceasefire offer regarding Ukraine. Meanwhile, India continues to import Russia's oil. Why did Trump order to change in the position of the US nuclear subs, and did this work to deter Russian officials from making another threat? On Friday, President Donald Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines to move closer to Russia. He made this decision in response to nuclear threats from Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council and former Russia's president. Trump said, quote, "I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in appropriate regions, just in case these foolish statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can be often lead to consequences." He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we are totally prepared. Medvedev recently referred to Russia's automatic nuclear strike capabilities after Trump warned him to watch his words. Axios reports that this is the first military action Trump has taken to deter Russia. This decision comes a week before his deadline for Putin to agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine or face sanctions and tariffs. Additionally, Steve Witkoff will travel to Russia soon to present Putin with a last-minute ceasefire offer regarding Ukraine.
Yeah, get a deal where people stop getting killed. They had a number that just came out that a tremendous number of Russian soldiers are being killed. And likewise, Ukraine, a lower number, but still thousands and thousands of people. And now we're adding towns where they're being hit by missiles. So it's a lot of people being killed in that ridiculous war. Well, there'll be sanctions, but they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. You know, they're wily characters, and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions. So we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on the border in terms of, we're talking about with Gaza, getting people fed. And he may be going, I think next week, Wednesday or Thursday, may be going to Russia. They would like to see him. They've asked that he meet, so we'll see what happens.
Following Trump's decision to reposition nuclear submarines closer to Russia, Dmitry Medvedev has stopped threatening the US and did not respond to Trump's latest actions. Moreover, according to the BBC, Russian news outlets have been largely dismissive of Trump's announcement. A military commentator for the Moskovsky Komsomolets newspaper described Trump as throwing a temper tantrum. A retired lieutenant general quoted in Kommersant labeled the US president's comments about submarines as meaningless bluster, suggesting that it's merely how he seeks attention. Notably, there has been no official reaction from the Kremlin or the Russian Ministry of Defense or Foreign Affairs Ministry, and Russian nuclear submarines have not been repositioned closer to the US. However, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin cautioned against excessive expectations linked to a peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. This warning follows pressure from US President Trump to reach a ceasefire deal. He has been threatening to impose sanctions on Moscow if there is no progress towards a peace deal by August 8th. Putin also announced that Russia has begun production of its own hypersonic missiles and confirmed plans to deploy them to Belarus later this year. Additionally, Putin appears to disregard the significant losses Russia has faced in the war, stating that no life has been lost in vain. Meanwhile, India's largest oil refiner, Indian Oil Corporation, has bought 7 million barrels of oil for delivery in September because the US might impose sanctions on Russia. Reuters reports. India's largest oil refiner, Indian Oil Corporation, has bought 7 million barrels of oil in September because there is a threat that the US might impose sanctions. These purchases include 4.5 million barrels of oil from the US, 500,000 barrels of Western Canadian select and 2 million of barrels of oil from Abu Dhabi. This is a way to partially replace oil supplies from Russia. Although India has been the biggest buyer of Russia's oil, state-owned refineries in India have recently stopped buying Russia's oil. This change is due to a smaller price difference and pressure from the US President Donald Trump, who has warned countries that purchase oil from Russia about high tariffs and sanctions. At least 2 tankers carrying Russian oil to India have been redirected after the latest US steps. Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff of the US President, accused India of supporting Russia's war in Ukraine, calling it unacceptable. President Trump has also said that India will no longer be allowed to buy oil from Russia. In the meantime, India is poised to maintain its oil purchases from Russia despite US President's threats to impose financial penalties, according to CNBC. On Friday, President Trump alleged that India would cease its purchases of Russian oil. Nevertheless, the sources indicated that long-term contracts would preclude any immediate alterations to the current strategy. Additionally, the New York Times reported that senior Indian officials affirm this has no been any kind of change in the government's policy regarding oil imports, while it has been observed that India's state refineries have recently suspended their purchases of Russian oil. Major firms such as Indian Oil Corporation, Hindustan Petroleum and other important Indian companies and Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemical Ltd. have not yet pursued Russian oil and have not yet stopped buying crude oil in the past and in this week. It is also noteworthy that Nagara Energy, which is majority owned by Russian entities and serves as a significant buyer of Russian oil, has recently encountered sanctions imposed by the European Union. Following these sanctions, Nayara's chief executive has resigned, and their 3 vessels laden with oil products from Nayara are currently unable to discharge from their categories owing the enforcement of these new restrictions. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump defends his decision to fire the leading US labor market statistician after a report that showed the national economy added just 73,000 jobs, fewer than expected in July. Senior Republican lawmakers are criticizing a decision made by Donald Trump. Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming said, quote, "If the president is firing the statistician because he doesn't like the numbers, but the numbers are accurate, then that's a problem. It's not the statistician's fault if the numbers are correct and not what the president expected." She also said that if the numbers are not reliable, the public should be informed. North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis added, "If she was fired because the president or someone else didn't like the numbers, then they needed to grow up." Kentucky Senator Rand Paul questioned whether firing people would improve the numbers. He stated, quote, "My first impression was you can make the numbers different or better by firing the people doing the counting." Even with some Republicans criticizing this decision, President Trump continues to defend his actions.
We're seeing phenomenal numbers in terms of the business we do with other countries and the business we do within our own country. I mean, really phenomenal numbers. We'll be announcing a new statistician sometime over the next 3-4 days. We had no confidence. I mean, the numbers were ridiculous, what she announced, but that was just one negative number. All of the numbers seem to be great. And if you remember, just before the election, this woman came out with these phenomenal numbers on Biden's economy. Phenomenal numbers. And then right after the election, they announced that those numbers were wrong. And that's what they did the other day. So it's a scam, in my opinion. Well, one of the things they're going to be talking about pretty soon are the tremendous drop in drug prices. You know, we've cut drug prices by 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500%. I don't mean 50%. I mean 1,400, 1,500%. Because we're going favored nations. We want the same price as Europe gets. We want the same price as other country gets. And over the years, 25, 30 years ago, it started where they were charging us much more. And I put an end to it, you know, with the letter that you saw last week. So I think that's going to be a point. I don't know how anybody could win an election if they're on the other side of that issue. So we'll be dropping drug prices. It'll start over the next 2 to 3 months by 1,200, 1,300, and even 1,400% and 500%, but not just 50% or 25%, which normally would be a lot, because the rest of the world pays much less for the identical drug. And we're going to be paying the same thing. We're going to have a favored nations. We will pay as low as the lowest nation in the world.
That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.